pulling back the curtain on the children of Robert Mitchum, a man who was more myth than movie star sometimes. What happens when your last name is synonymous with Hollywood cool, rebellion, and raw talent? Did his kids embrace the spotlight, run from it, or find their own way to shine? Stick around because their stories are more complex than any movie role. Number 3. James Mitchum. First up is James Mitchum, or Jim, the eldest, born right in Los Angeles in 1941. Imagine your earliest memories being on movie sets. James quite literally grew up in the film world. He even had an uncredited role as a kid in a western called Colorado Territory when he was just 8. His official debut, though, was a big one, the 1958 film Thunder Road. This wasn't just any movie. It became a cult classic, especially on the drive-in circuit. And here's the kicker. James played the younger brother to his actual father, Robert Mitchum. Fun fact, that role was supposedly meant for Elvis Presley. But the King's manager wanted too much dough, so young James stepped in. For a first proper gig, sharing the screen with your legendary dad in a hit film. Not a bad start at all. It gave him a ton of visibility right out of the gate. What's a bit funny is that a few years later, in a 1962 episode of Have Gun, Will Travel, James was introduced to audiences again. Maybe Hollywood, or even his dad, figured his career could use another little nudge, a fresh launch. James Mitchum certainly looked the part. He had that striking physical resemblance to his father, which, let's be honest, is a classic double-edged sword in Hollywood. That Mitchum name, it definitely opened doors, but it also came with this giant, invisible measuring stick. Every role, every performance, you just know people were thinking, is he as good as his old man? And Robert Mitchum, with his famous calm, cool disinterest and notorious off-screen life, was an incredibly tough act to follow. Sources say this comparison both helped and seriously hindered James's career. He worked steadily for decades, from the late 40s into the early 90s, racking up over 30 film credits. You'd often see him in westerns and action films, a good number of B-movies. Some of his more notable flicks include Young Guns of Texas, 1962, Ride the Wild Surf, 1964, where he played a surfer named Eskimo. He was in big war movies, too, like In Harm's Way, 1965, with John Wayne and Kirk Douglas, and Ambush Bay, 1966. He even played a villain in The Invincible Six, 1970. And perhaps one of his most well-known later roles was Grady Hagg in Moonunners, 1975. This is cool because Moonunners was basically a blueprint for the massively popular TV show, The Dukes of Hazzard. He did some TV work too, popping up in shows like Rawhide and The High Chaperone. But when it came to what critics thought, well, it's tough. There isn't a lot of deep analysis of James's acting style on its own. Most of the time it's, well, compared to his dad. For Thunder Road, some said he was a bit stiff next to Robert's natural magnetism, though others cut him slack as a beginner. Later on, a review for Moonunners was pretty harsh, calling his lead performance especially charmless. Ouch! The main challenge for James was establishing his own identity. His dad was such a unique force of nature. Living up to that, especially when you look so much like him, is a massive hurdle. So his career was solid. He worked a lot, but he never quite escaped that giant shadow. Think competent and sustained, but not the same kind of critical or popular fireworks his father produced. Privately, James married actress Wenda Wagner, and they had a son, Price. After their divorce, he was later with a woman named Vivian, and they had 2 children, Will and Caitlin. He seemed to keep his family life more under wraps than his famous father ever did. What's really telling is how James himself saw his father. In a 2008 Q&A, he said, "I miss him more as a guy that I knew than maybe as a father figure. He and I became very good friends. He admitted Robert Mitchum might have had some shortcomings as a father, but he was a great guy, very thoughtful and considerate. He also revealed his dad did a lot of charity work on the quiet, never wanting recognition. That gives you a different picture of the legend, doesn't it? For the Mitchum kids, James, Christopher, and Petrine, that shadow was probably longer and darker than most. Robert Mitchum wasn't just an actor, he was a cultural icon, the epitome of the anti-hero, a guy who seemed to live by his own rules, on and off screen. Imagine trying to figure out who you are when your dad is that guy. It's a hell of a thing to carry. Each of them had to find their own way to deal with it, to carve out their own space in a world that was always looking over their shoulder at the ghost of their father. Number 2. Christopher Mitchum, born in 1943, and his Hollywood story, it's got some serious twists and turns. Like his older brother James, Chris eventually stepped into the acting world, but he took a more roundabout route. Initially, Chris seemed to want to stay out of the spotlight. He went for a solid education, attending the University of Pennsylvania, and even studying abroad at Trinity College in Dublin. He got his degree from the University of Arizona. It was only during his university years that he really got interested in filmmaking, starting as an extra. He even worked as a gopher, basically a production assistant, on a couple of his dad's westerns in 1969, learning the business from the ground up. Then came a huge break. Chris auditioned for the one and only John Wayne. The Duke was impressed and cast him in Chai Sim, 1970. Wayne then introduced him to another legend, director Howard Hawks, who put Chris in starring roles in Rio Lobo, 1970, and Big Jake, 1971. Talk about a launch pad, working with John Wayne and Howard Hawks back-to-back. You'd think he was set for Hollywood stardom, but here's where Christopher's story takes a dramatic nosedive. According to Chris himself, after these big movies, his Hollywood career actually just dried up in the States. He tells a story about a casting director for the film Steelyard Blues, telling him flat out she couldn't even interview him specifically because he'd worked with John Wayne. Chris came to believe he was blackballed by what he termed liberal Hollywood. Why? Because of his association with Wayne, who was a very outspoken conservative during the super-politicized Vietnam War era. So liberal Hollywood went after actors who worked with him, and I was blacklisted, Chris stated in an interview. If that's true, it's a stark reminder of how much politics could mess with your career in Hollywood. So what did he do? He went international. Chris became a pretty big name in places like Spain, Hong Kong, Indonesia, and the Philippines. He ended up making over 60 films in 14 different countries. A lot of these were B-grade action flicks and genre movies, titles like Master Samurai, SFX Retaliator, and Lethal Cowboy. It might not have been Hollywood A-list, but it showed incredible resilience. The guy kept working on a global stage. He even picked up some awards along the way, like Photoplay's Gold Medal Award, and a nod from Box Office magazine as one of the top 5 stars of the future early in his career. He also reportedly won awards in China and Indonesia for his acting. And get this, even after the supposed blacklisting, Chris was heavily involved in the Screen Actors Guild, SAG, serving as its national first vice president from 1987 to 1989. That tells you he still had standing within the acting community, or at least a big part of it. But acting wasn't his only game. Chris also got into screenwriting, co-writing a film called Triple Cross. In interviews, he even said he actually prefers writing these days. He was working on a murder mystery novel, too. And then there's politics. Christopher Mitchum became an active Republican. He ran for the U.S. House of Representatives in California a couple of times, 2012 and 2014, and for the California State Assembly back in 1998. He didn't win, but in 2014, he got a very respectable 48.1% of the vote against the incumbent. His platforms were staunchly conservative, repealing Obamacare, cutting the national debt, lower taxes, and stronger border security. This political path is pretty fascinating, especially given his claims about why his Hollywood career stalled. One of the most talked-about moments in his life was a major falling out with John Wayne. It happened after a political argument they had on Johnny Carson's The Tonight Show in 1972, reportedly about environmentalism. Wayne, the conservative icon, apparently saw environmentalism as anti-business and too liberal. The argument led to a complete break. Chris said he tried to reconcile, even when Wayne was dying, but the Duke never forgave him. And Chris directly linked this feud to his professional troubles. It's a heavy story, how a single argument on TV could change the course of a career. Like his brother, Chris also has a family. He married Cynthia Davis, and they had 4 kids, Carolyn, Carrie, Christopher Robert, who goes by Bentley, Jennifer, and Keen. Both Bentley and Carrie followed the family tradition into acting, and even his granddaughters are actresses. The Mitchum acting dynasty just keeps on going. Chris has also spoken thoughtfully about his father, trying to paint a fuller picture than just the bad boy image. He talked about Robert's intellect, his hidden talents as a poet, and his resilience. Was my dad a bad boy and a brawler and a drinker? Yeah, but he was a lot more than that, Christopher shared. Number 1, Petrine Mitchum. Born in 1954, her journey is quite different from her brother's. While she dipped her toe into acting, her real mark has been made behind the scenes. As a writer, producer, and filmmaker, often focusing on preserving unique bits of Hollywood and cultural history. Her acting career was brief. Her most noted role was as Third Hippie, credited as Petrine Mitchum. In the 1972 Charles Bronson movie The Mechanic, she also appeared in a 2015 film she produced called This Old Horse, but her real talents lay elsewhere. Petrine worked as a Hollywood story editor, an analyst for big companies like The Ladd Company, Pathé, TriStar, and DreamWorks. That means she was reading scripts, shaping stories, and really understanding how films get made from the ground up. This experience clearly sharpened her skills for what came next. As an author, Petrine Mitchum, the name she often uses for her scholarly work, has done some amazing things. Her most famous book is probably Hollywood Hoofbeats, a fascinating story of horses in movies and television, co-authored with Audrey Pavia. It's a deep dive into the history of iconic movie horses like Trigger and Mr. Ed. She's an avid horsewoman herself, so this was a real passion project. The book got a lot of praise, and she even discussed it on NPR's Fresh Air. She also co-wrote the memoir of Nudie Cohn back in 1978. Nudie was the legendary rodeo tailor who designed those incredible rhinestone suits for stars like Elvis and Roy Rogers. This early work gave her rare audio recordings of Nudie himself, which became crucial later. And showing her range, she wrote an illustrated children's book in 2017 called Snout About Town, about a shelter dog adopted by a movie star, with some sales benefiting shelter dogs. Petrine also made her mark as a filmmaker. She directed some early short films. One called Out of Gas is particularly cool. It starred her dad, Robert Mitchum, and his out-of-the-past co-star, Jane Greer, in a spoof of their classic film Noir. It even aired on Saturday Night Live and was later licensed by Turner Classic Movies. Imagine directing your legendary father in a send-up of one of his most iconic roles. Her biggest filmmaking endeavor has been a documentary about Nudie Cohn. It started as Rhinestone Cowboy and evolved into a docuseries called From Rawhide to Rhinestones, How the West is Worn. This project explores the whole history of Western fashion with Nudie at its heart. It's been a labor of love for decades, stemming from those memoir recordings back in the 70s. She also served as an associate producer on a TV movie called James Stewart, Robert Mitchum. The Two Faces of America, another project that directly engaged with her father's legacy. Petrine married John S. Richardson in 1980. Unlike her brothers, there isn't much public information about her having children, suggesting she's kept that part of her life very private. She lives in California's Santa Ynez Valley with her rescue dogs and horses, a life that seems to perfectly blend her personal passions with her professional work. None of them quite replicated Robert Mitchum's iconic, almost mythical status. But how could they? That was a once-in-a-generation kind of lightning. Instead, they each navigated that immense shadow with resilience. Their lives show that even when born into the brightest of spotlights, the real journey is finding your own light,